along with a number of other policy programs at Aspen, Peggy Clark, Janet Topolsky, Joyce Klein, who's not here today, who have all had the pleasure of spending some extended portion of our careers with Bob Friedman, learning from him, working with him, being inspired by the way that he believes in people's capacity and the way that he believes that we all can help to grow it if only they had a few $1,000s. So we're excited to be able to host a book talk today around Bob's new book. Bob Friedman is the chair and founder of Prosperity Now, which many of you knew as Corporation for Enterprise Development. He's an expert in the asset building field and the economic development field and the micro enterprise field, as Peggy said a little bit earlier today. And he has written, I think, the definitive book on what matters now and why now we should think about savings and shared prosperity in an emphatic way. And so, to give you all a flavor of the book, we're inviting Bob to come and share, and then we'll invite, after that, Helaine will come up, Helaine Olen, who is works with the Washington Post and is on the Post partisan blog. But I actually asked Helaine to moderate a Q&A with Bob, mainly, her insights around the policies that he writes about in the book, her own work on the book Pound Foolish and the index card, and also one of my personal favorite parts of what you do, which is the advisory board of the Economic Hardship Project, which for many of you who don't look at that website and look at those stories, that's an incredible resource. And if you have any of the role in shaping that, then thank you. Thank you for that. So let me invite Bob up. Bob, please come up and why don't you give us an overview of the main parts of the book, and then we'll get Helaine up and you guys can have a Q&A.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's a hard introduction to follow. And if I had any sense, I wouldn't. I learned early in the business, whether of community practice, public policy, private market change, it's all about people. And Margaret Mead said it best, one person can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I've made it a practice of having the best friends in the world. So thank you, Ida, Janet, Peggy. Thank all of you for coming today. The reason I wanted to talk to you, the reason I wrote this book, was to recruit people to create the future we want. I hope that you will buy the book. I hope you will find it worth reading. More than anything, I hope you will find a message that resonates and that you want to carry. I was talking to a friend of mine, Peter Barnes. Some of you may be lucky enough to know him, a great social change theorist and progressive economic author. He said, well, nobody's going to read the central chapters. And if you're lucky, someone may read the conclusion. And maybe if they like that, they'll read the first chapter. But it's best if you get your message in the title. I tried to do that in a few $1,000s, Sparking Prosperity for All. It is about what I think I've learned in 40 years, working at Prosperity Now, but with folks all over the country, trying to craft paths to economic opportunity, real economic opportunity for all people. It's actually very hard to read the book from start to finish. There are 24 stories. There are 16 illustrations. My mom doesn't like them, but hopefully you will. And then there are 6 chapters, Wealth, which is kind of my own personal story, and basically the thesis of the book that everybody needs a nest egg to have a future, that you need not just present money to pay the bills or past money to pay debts, but a few $1,000s to give you the sense that there might be a future, a reason prepare and plan for that future, and the ability to invest in yourself when maybe only you believe. The next 4 chapters describe the central paths toward wealth creation, savings, basic savings to buffer you from the everyday accidents and illnesses, what I call generation accounts for education, home, and then business. And then the last chapter, prosperity, tries to tie all those up together and to take a historical perspective, whereas each of those chapters talks about the dynamic of business or home ownership, and then talks about the lessons from the last 40 years of rigorous exploration. The last chapter talks about the lessons from 250 years of our history at creating opportunity. So I hope you will dip into that. I want to try and summarize in less than 10 minutes the key ideas of the book, which are people, money, and the future. With people, and the 24 profiles in the book are some of these people, but there really are millions like them, are low-income people who often start out with no chance, but who make a future for themselves and their kids. I want to read you from the book about just one of, actually I'm going to tell you about her first and then just read a paragraph. But a woman I met, Elsie, who grew up in the Desire public housing projects in New Orleans. I love how we name these projects. She was cut off by water and a rail line and an industrial park from any part of the city. She says, I'm sure there were good things about my upbringing, but I don't remember any. She never met her father. Her mom was a drug addict. They were abused by a number of men, finally left to go to Denver when they could get some tickets, arrived there in the snow, as she said. It was the first time she ever saw snow. It was a cold welcome. She went through 18 foster homes, none of them really home. She said at age 9, she realized that no one was going to help her, that if she was going to do anything in life, she would have to do it herself. She said she found a world in books, and she read all of the Boxcar Kids series. She would walk reading. It was her other world. When she was 15, she got into an independent living program in Denver, was given an individual development account, which I'll be talking about some, but it's a match savings account, or as one welfare mom told me once, she said, oh, I see, you mean a 401k except for me. Match savings, in Elsie's case, a 2-to-1 match. And this is what she says about it. Through that program, she received leadership training, a spending stipend, and an individual development account. I thought it was too good to be true at first. This was the first time in my life that people invested in me and my individual goals. It was a literal investment in cold, hard cash. I could save and watch it grow. I had had lots of programs, even some training in financial education. But this was the first time anyone put actual money that I could use for my future. If I saved, they would match my savings $2 to $1. I was in work study. I didn't earn much, but I put my money into my account monthly. Sometimes only a few pennies, most often $15 a month. I saved $1,500 in 2 years. She went through college debt-free. And is today a neonatal nanny, earning a near six-figure income, building the kind of families she never had. We at Prosperity Now and partners have done rigorous demonstration projects over the last 40 years. The self-employment investment demonstration with welfare mothers starting businesses, the American Dream demonstration with individual development accounts for low-income people, the SEED, Saving for Education, Enterprise and Down Payments demonstration for kids' accounts, and the I'm Home demonstration looking at manufactured housing as a source of housing for folks. There are thousands of stories and rigorous data from those demonstrations over 40 years. There are hundreds of thousands of people who have benefited from individual development accounts, children's accounts, homeownership programs for low-income people. The data is in the book. And there are, most importantly, there are millions, if not hundreds of millions, of people who need and deserve this opportunity. Which brings me to money. I think it takes a few $1,000s to allow someone to imagine a future better than the present. As you know, most Americans today are in debt. If you're in debt, you're not feeling very good about yourself. You're not looking ahead. And you don't have, I mean, in some ways, if you don't have that money, I don't think you have a real future. During the 20th century, our approach to poverty was creating the safety net and income maintenance programs so that low-income people could eat, be housed. Often those programs, though, penalized you for doing everything you needed to do to move forward, learn, earn, save, invest. I think our challenge for the 21st century is to create the latter, to enable everyone to move forward with that few $1,000. Which brings me to the second part of money. We have the money. We are spending at the federal level alone in excess of $700 billion a year on things like the home mortgage interest deduction, preferential capital gains rate, pension fund exclusions, 529 college savings program. But overwhelmingly, that goes to reward the rich, miss the middle, and penalize the poor. The wealthiest 0.1% of Americans, people making over $1 million a year, get an average annual benefit of $160,000. Working families making $55,000 or less get $226. $800, $1. This makes no sense. It's an obscene expenditure that's neither makes any sense nor is fair. The private sector is doing fine at generating the most unequal economy we've had in our country's history. We don't need to be subsidizing that, but we could turn that around into a possibility for everyone. We have proven the practice, the policy, the market changes that can make that true. I propose, really this book is more about solutions than the problem. I advance 5 different kinds of accounts. Universal savings accounts, generation accounts, which are for education, but also to close the racial wealth divide within a generation, home accounts, business accounts, and then prosperity accounts to wind them all up, all of them funded by turning the upside down subsidies right side up. Again, with half of the $700 billion we spend at the federal level, we could have prosperity accounts matching the first $1,000 in savings of every American, the poorest fifth of them, 3 to 1, so that every year, every individual gets $4,000. It would change stuff. I really think GI Bill meets 401k. In case you don't remember the GI Bill, I want to remind you what it achieved. Of all the democratic wealth-building moments in our history, The greatest, perhaps, was the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, commonly known as the GI Bill. Historian Edward Hume summarizes the fundamental changes the GI Bill effected. A nation of renters would become a nation of homeowners. College would be transformed from an elite bastion to a middle-class entitlement. Suburbia would be born amid the clatter of bulldozers and the smell of new asphalt linking it all together. Inner cities would collapse. The direct and indirect impacts of the GI Bill, both for good and ill, can hardly be overstated. 200,000 businesses, 8 million students who receive training and college degrees, 5 million homeowners. The bill tripled the middle class and changed the shape of the income distribution from pyramid to diamond within a decade. I think we need a GI Bill. I need to say, there was a dark side to the GI Bill. It was only for men. It wasn't for the 17 million women who were the arsenal of democracy. The chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, John Elliott Rankin, was an out-and-out explicit racist, anti-Semite. He made sure that the administration of the GI Bill in the South was in the hands of local and state administrators under Jim Crow. So the benefits never went to African Americans in the South. But I think what's right with the bill can fix what's wrong with the bill. And the prosperity bill that I suggest, I think, basically is a GI Bill based on savings for everyone with graduated matches designed to close the racial wealth divide within my lifetime, getting shorter and shorter. We can do this now. We have the way to do it. And so I just want to close, I've gone too long, I'm sorry, with the last two paragraphs of The Afterword by Cory Booker. What we need, as this book recommends, is a renewed commitment to our shared prosperity, so that every family can amass the few $1,000s they need to realize their dreams, so that everyone has the opportunity to go to college, start a business, create jobs, assemble a down payment on a house, to seek the American dream, so that in the words of Langston Hughes, America can be America again, the America that never was, yet still must be. We can be a nation that invests in, empowers, and champions its people, all of its people. We can create millions of new businesses, jobs, homeowners, skilled workers. It's a matter now of will. Thanks.
Bob, why don't you go ahead and sit up here, and Helaine, come on up. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, they told me to put this down next to me, so I'm hoping I don't drop it at some point. So anyway, thank you. That was a wonderful, wonderful opening. So I wanted to say, I actually wrote up two first questions. I'm still not sure which one to ask, but I'm going to go ahead with one. And I'm going to say it. One of the things I loved about the book were all the stories you told in it. Everybody, buy the book afterwards. He tells these amazing stories about the people who were helped by all these programs. And they're really compelling and wonderful. And having assets gives people choices in life. It lets you leave a job. It lets you leave an abusive spouse. It lets you start a new business. It lets you raise your children without panic. But in our society, as we all know, we blame people a lot. So the question I wanted to ask you is, how did you decide to devote your life to this sort of work?
So I tell people, and it's true, I'm traffic in luck. I was born with more choices maybe than anyone should have. It was assumed that I would go to college before I was born. I could buy my first house without worrying. I could take an unpaid job and even an unpaid enterprise when I really didn't know what I was doing. The short answer is, and I had two great parents. On the day I was born, I was worth more than my father was, even though he was a World War II veteran, and an accomplished architect. The money came through my mom's side, Levi Strauss and Company, that my grandfather and larger family had run, at one time and maybe again to one of the leading apparel companies in the world. I think everyone deserves some measure of those choices, and we would all be better off for it if everyone can develop and follow their own dreams and talents.
Okay. So that brings me to my next question, which is, we often use income inequality and wealth inequality interchangeably in this society. We shouldn't. Can you talk a little bit about that and why we shouldn't and what you mean by, because obviously your plan is about building wealth.
Right. So look, I think income inequality in this country is troubling. But I think wealth inequality dwarfs income inequality, both in magnitude and in the profundity of it. As Michael Sheridan said in his epic Assets in the Poor, 30 years ago almost, income may feed people's stomachs, but assets change their heads. Assets are hope in concrete form. He would also say, look, it's kind of like streams and ponds. There's a reason that farmers dam streams to have ponds so that you have water in the summer.
Okay.
And it's much more unequal now. I mean, a sixth of Americans are income poor, at least by our measure. A third to a half of them are asset poor, not having the assets to sustain themselves and their families for 3 months if their job is interrupted or source of income. And that rises to 2/3 to 80% of people of color.
Right. I mean, it's the famous statistic that about, 40% of people couldn't come up with $400 in
It's
an
actually
emergency.
54%.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's really staggering. So one thing you mentioned, I just have to ask so you can define terms. When you were speaking, you mentioned individual development accounts. Tell everybody what they are in case they aren't familiar with your work.
Again, the individual development account was a basic idea that Michael Sheridan proposed in his book, Assets in the Poor, which I would highly recommend. Although it's not my mission today, I would highly recommend to you if you haven't already read it. And basically, it is a 401k, except for low-income people. So it's a matched account, and there have been different match rates, 1-to-1, 2-to-1, as much as 8-to-1, for high-return human investments, generally post-secondary education, home ownership, business, but you can argue about others, cars, assistive technology, citizenship, and more. And usually accompanied with some kind of financial education, both general financial education and asset-specific financial education, business planning, home ownership training.
Okay. I have one other question before I actually plunge into the things in the book, which is, one of the things when I read the book was, how do people find your programs? How do they stumble into you? I mean, how do they learn about you? How do people find you? So if anybody's listening and they need help.
Right. Well, we do have on our website, prosperitynow.org, there is a map of a lot of these programs. They are all over. I think the more general question is people learn locally. And I think what's important to understand is this is a movement that's grown bottom up. Yes, some of the inspiration has come from national groups, but it is communities saying, this makes sense. And starting community programs, local programs. There are state programs. There was a federal program, a couple federal programs that had an incredible record, the Assets for Independence Act, over 20 years, but despite the evidence that it worked, it was eliminated last year, which I think is okay because it was only designed to be a demonstration. Now we need to move to full policy for everybody.
How was it eliminated? Was it part of tax reform, or was it just not
It was
renewed
kind of
simply?
lost in the shuffle. It was never authorized and appropriated forever. And last year it kind of got lost in the shuffle while we were wasting money on other things.
Okay. All right, so I want to ask you about a couple specific proposals in the account. And you mentioned some of them briefly up here, but I'd like you to talk a little bit more about them. Generation accounts. What are they? How do they work? And why are they so important?
So generation accounts in the book is what we have called child savings accounts, child development accounts, a variety of names. They are a version of 529 college savings programs, except that 529 plans really only benefit the wealthy, because basically what you get is a tax deduction that only helps if you have high income where the tax deduction helps. Child accounts come early. They're kind of scholarship account, but they come earlier in life. And there are 500,000, we estimate, by the end of the year in 42 states in almost 100 programs, local, state, and federal. What I propose in the book in generation accounts is an endowment of up to $2,500 for the poorest fifth of kids, and matching funds for savings, 4 to 1 for the lowest fifth of kids and 1 to 4 for the richest fifth. It would enable the poorest kids to amass $25,000 by age 5 and $50,000 by age 18. Senator Booker this morning introduced what he calls American Opportunity Accounts. $1,000 for every kid at birth, up to $2,000 every year for kids below the poverty line and then up. So it's a $60 billion proposal financed out of a revived estate tax, which I'm also for. Just taking the estate tax back to where it was in the early 2000s would take what's now a gift to the luckiest and richest and make it a life chance for everyone.
And why are generation accounts so important? And do you expect people to use them for college, or could they use them for other things as well?
Ideally, college is the most obvious use, but they really, we've learned, are for more than just college. Again, for some people, college or training isn't the right route. Some of the best entrepreneurs I know never went to college, and we ought to open that. And I think everybody needs a home. We ought to open that. The other piece that we've become more and more cognizant of is the racial wealth divide, which is truly a blot on our history. So that African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans have a few cents in assets for every dollar whites have. Depending how you measure, it's around $120,000 for whites. It's $8,000 for African Americans. It's totally different life chance. So really, generation accounts and all the accounts are designed to close that gap. With $700 billion in spending a year and probably another $200 billion flowing the same way at the state level, we really can close it within our lifetime if we just decide that we're finally ready to face up to our history and to greet and embrace the talents and visions and dreams and capabilities of all of our people.
And there's a whole history attached to these, right? In the book, you go back and point out that Tom Paine even advocated for these,
Yes.
right? I mean, so
Thank
it's,
you.
which I found fascinating because I didn't know that. So it argues why, you're not arguing, say, for something like free college tuition, because you believe that these should be bigger than college in a way. Are they giving people basically a chance who don't have a chance? Is that the sort of thought here?
Yeah, I think, again, there are some people who are so brilliant that you can probably, I think Elsie is one, right, that can do amazing things with nothing. But it helps, and I'm not saying that a few $1,000s is necessarily enough, but I think people need something to get a chance.
Okay, and that brings me, you also talk a lot in the book about homeownership. Why is homeownership so important? Because especially now, there's so many people who go, oh my God, no, right? Like, not after what happened 10 years ago.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all of these questions. The 89% of Americans say they want to own their own home. It has been the center of the American dream for generations and for a reason. I mean, home is much more than just a house. It's a place of refuge. It's where the family grows. It's where dreams grow. And, you know, I think it would be wrong to give up on home ownership now, even if everybody had had a chance. But white owns 72.5% of white Americans own their own home, 42% of African Americans, 46% of Latinos. This is not okay, and it's because, as Robert Rubenstein explains in his The Color of Law, this is de jure segregation, discrimination. 120 years ago, 10% of Americans owned their own home. We created home ownership opportunities for the middle class. The creation of the 30-year mortgage by the federal government with guarantees by Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae, that's what enabled 72% of whites, you know, to get the GI Bill enabled 8 million, 9 million Americans to buy their own homes, but again, under racial exclusion. The Homestead Act similarly. We create this market. We can recreate.
And home ownership is important because it makes up the majority of wealth for, what is it, 70%? Am I remembering this right? Okay. Of people.
And maybe I should just add, and we're of that $700 billion that I cited, $251 billion a year is for home ownership. But it's a reward for home owning, and it's really a reward for home owing. It's not just the home mortgage interest deduction. It is a bunch of other things that don't go to renters, that don't go to low-income homeowners.
Right, it's almost backwards.
So I propose home accounts that should be able to enable every person to assemble the down payment, which is the biggest stumbling block. It's not the only one.
Something in home ownership that is slightly a small tangent, but I'm sort of fascinated by, is you talk a bunch in the book about mobile homes, which I mean are always always considered sort of secondary, and you say they shouldn't be. That these are really important. Talk about why they are so important.
So, mobile homes, we talk about them as manufactured housing. Genevieve is out there, an expert, so she can correct me on this. Manufactured housing is the largest source of affordable, unsubsidized affordable home ownership in the country. But there are a number of imperfections. Basically, the industry was spawned to sell more cars, right? That's what mobile homes are. They're homes on chassis. Since the '76 code, they're high-quality homes, energy-efficient homes now, and I do, the main problem is the homeowners don't own the home under them, and the mobile homes are not very mobile. So it costs more to transport them than to keep them in place. A number of states now require that if the mobile home park is closed, that it be offered to the residents. And there are the Resident-Owned Communities USA, a social enterprise that's thriving, is converting homes. I talk in the book, I give two stories of actually two manufactured housing communities in Minneapolis, one Lowry Grove, that is allowed to close. Again, 90 homes. A third of the residents have been there 5 years. A third have been there 10 years or more, half more than 5 years. This is the home, the only home they ever known. Frank Edelman there talks about how he's never moving, and in fact, he killed himself 10 days before the complex was sold. Right across town is Park Plaza, where the 84 residents combine with the help of Rock USA, buy the community. They have now, they have access to some of the best schools in the state. They've fixed up the community. They've rehabbed the sewer and water lines. They've repaved the streets. It's now a community of hope. So we could do that again nationwide.
I might be putting you on the spot with this.
Can I? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's okay.
And it is the largest source of affordable home ownership. So 75%, I believe, of the homes under $100,000 in this country are manufactured housing.
That was actually be part of my question.
Oh,
I
I'm
wanted to
sorry.
put you on the spot about was, how much less expensive are they than what we think of as conventional homes, percentage-wise?
50 to 75%.
Is there any way to? This is not something you really talk much about in the book, but is there any way to change the laws so that people literally can't get thrown
absolutely.
out? I mean, because it seems to be inherently unstable to buy a home that at any point gets sold out from under you, even if you change the laws so that they have to have first right of ownership, right? That's still problematic if everybody in the park is broke or something, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is a uniform code, and there are several states that have mandated at least right of first refusal, and there is a financing system that Rock USA has developed, but more is going into the private sector. There's no reason. Rock USA and the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund have done 200 deals over 20 years, 0 defaults. There's no reason these shouldn't be financed. And some private sector firms are coming in, and Fannie Mae and Ginnie Mae, if they ever get resuscitated, there's no reason. These are the kinds of mortgages that we should be guaranteeing, not predatory variable rate mortgages.
And there are a lot of predatory mortgages in the mobile home sector
Yes,
as well.
yes.
Right. It's so I'm going to change the subject slightly. I want to talk about the workplace for a moment. How could we structure the workplace so that people could, savings accounts at the workplace, so that people could save more effectively, not just for retirement at work?
So one of the things, there's a lot of work going on, and there's a lot more that could go on. Again, everybody needs reserve savings. Accidents, illnesses happen to all of us. Payday loans are among the most egregious sources of predatory lending. And unless you borrow to put in an investment into an investment that will yield more than the interest rate, you're going to sink deeper and deeper in debt. So employers are beginning to provide low-cost payday loans, emergency loans to their employees. There's no reason that can't be done more. Most of us save in ways that are made easy for us, and that's 401k. You make the decision once when you go to work, how much is going to be taken out of your paycheck. The employer matches it 1-to-1. The government is generous on its tax treatment. It grows, and at the end of the day, you say, I did that myself. That's my money. All we're really talking about is creating that system for everybody. But it definitely could be done in the workplace, and there's more and more conversation forwarded by a lot of nonprofits, but also Prudential is now doing sidecar savings accounts, rainy day accounts. Again, Senator Booker, but then more importantly, has introduced a bipartisan bill for rainy day savings.
If I'm remembering right, there was some concern with rainy day savings that it wasn't explicitly authorized. Am I right about this? And that it needed to be explicitly authorized? Am I remembering right?
Well, I think that's true, and that authorization is there. The other concern was there has been the rise of secured choice programs.
Mm-hmm.
So the problem is not every firm offers 401k, especially smaller businesses. And so some states like California, I'm forgetting several of the others, have introduced secure choice plans, Illinois and another, so that Oregon, thank you, so that employers have to offer employees a chance to open a 401k. They don't have to match, but they have to offer.
Right. And what is the status of the secure retirement accounts now? They are under some attack out of Washington, correct?
Right. So they took a ruling from the Department of Labor to allow them, and then the current administration reversed that ruling. But California, Oregon, Illinois feel like they have the leeway they need to go forward.
Okay. And you also talk about entrepreneurship in the book. Do you want to talk about that for 1 minute?
I love to talk about entrepreneurship.
I love to too.
So that I think the essential fact that you need to recognize is all net new jobs created in the last 30 years were created by new businesses. Not big, not small, but new. And often, and several people in the room know this very well, Peggy, Gene Severance back there, often by people not now in business, who start businesses because they need to, because they need the flexibility. I have some stories in the book of people caught in dead-end jobs who need to create a job for themselves that allows them to work with their family and their kids. And I propose MBAs, matched business accounts, again, saving for that purpose. Gene Severance in the back here proposed the self-employment tax initiative. You know, we provide unemployment insurance for folks, but we don't allow them to use that money to create a business and a job for themselves. There's no reason we shouldn't.
And there's been a huge fall off in entrepreneurship over the past several decades. And why do you think that is?
There has been. So in the 1980s, we were routinely creating 3 million jobs a year. More recently, it's gone down to 2 million jobs a year. Obviously, there are lots of changes in the economy. I think that one of the reasons is because initial investment comes from personal savings, savings of friends, family, and associates. And that's savings that's been wiped out by the rise in debt, which is also, structural, not behavioral, or not entirely behavioral, certainly. And also then, the increase in expenses and the volatility of the economy.
Yeah, I always remember, I think it was during the 2012 campaign, Mitt Romney gave a speech, and I think he was with the guy from Papa John's. He said, start a business, borrow 10 grand from your parents. Am I remembering this right?
Yes.
If somebody in the audience can correct me if I'm wrong, please. And it made me realize when he said that, just how we had taken that system for granted. That, in the way that all of this had sort of crept up on us, our wealth gap and our income inequality, that, he just assumed everybody had parents they could go to for 10 grand when we know that's not the case.
And it's really interesting if you look at inheritance patterns. So 31% of Americans inherit from their parents, but it's actually a much higher percentage of whites, and that's not the way it works in communities of color. I remember talking about, or a friend, African-American woman, said, you know, she and her husband, two professionals, were going to buy their first home, and they had everything except the down payment. And they said to the broker, well, where do people get their down payment? And he said, you get it from your parents. And she said, no, you don't understand. We're sending our parents money. So again, we need to take what people have done from time immemorial, but move that into policy and a structure for savings.
Right, and I think it's Matthew Esmond points out in Evicted that the majority now of first-time home buyers are getting money from their parents at this point as well, which again was something I knew it was bad, but I didn't realize it was quite that bad. So of all the things you mentioned in the book, what do you consider the most important? You mentioned a lot. I didn't get to all of them, everybody. You need to buy the book to read more of them.
So what have I forgotten? Look, I think the most important thing, and what I've been reminded every time we've bet on the productive capacity of people, and particularly people marginalized in this economy, we have been rewarded by that faith. Never underestimate people, particularly people who look different or you know, foster kids. I mean, as Van Jones said, we're leaving genius on the table. And I think the genius of this country has been this idea that everybody should get to play. And if everybody gets to play, we will all do better because of that.
Okay. One thing in the book you said that surprised me a little bit was you are not a big fan of universal basic income. How come? Because it would seem, it would seem like it could solve some of these issues, at least give some people seed money every year, right?
As they say, I've evolved a little on that issue. We need more sources of income. I'm for universal basic income in general. The LIFT piece of legislation introduced by Kamala Harris that would give a $3,000 individual or $6,000 refundable tax credit is a form that I think could work. But I think universal basic assets answers some questions that universal basic income can't right now.
Such as?
Such as, where does the money come from? I think it comes from this $700 billion we're already spending, but spending terribly. It is a high return investment and a high expectation of low-income people that ennobles them. I think in some ways there's no greater insult to a person than to say, you know, I'd rather just support you because you can't contribute or because you might not be able to contribute. I think we owe everyone the economic respect of being homeowners, entrepreneurs, college material. And we have proven models, and we have 30 years of random assignment control group experimentation that bears this out, whereas experimentation with universal basic income is just beginning. I will say that my experience is people use money well. But we also know from investigations of just income support versus conditional cash transfers where there's some purpose, that actually restrictions are helpful, that some people need to be signaled that the future is possible and that it's worth undertaking the risk and seeking the opportunity.
Okay, so how do we get people, how do we convince them to give up what they see are their goodies, like, you know, the mortgage deduction or their 401k deduction, to do all this? I mean, because one of the things I find when I'm doing my work on this, right, is you'll see people say, oh my God, this 401k thing, it doesn't work. We should expand Social Security. And then you say, well, should we give up the 401k? They're like, no, I really like my 401k too. I just want both, right?
Right.
There doesn't seem to be the sort of give and take here a little bit. How do you get around this? How do you convince people that we really need to do this and everybody's going to have to give up a little bit too?
Well, I think at the high end, you give up something. But in return for a society and an economy that works better. So I really think everyone, even the billionaires, gets something out of it. But the other, if you really need to cling to the home mortgage and interest deduction, which I know this is anathema, it's terrible policy. And it wasn't even designed as homeownership policy, right?
What was it designed as?
It was, the idea in 1906 was that interest on loans shouldn't be taxed. But again, it's a reward for homeowing. It doesn't help anyone in the middle class. If you want, we can leave it all standing. Prosperity accounts, we can finance with half of what we're spending today. But then with home accounts or the match business accounts or generation accounts or prosperity accounts, we can finance them with a fraction of what we're spending now. And we can leave the tax deduction at the high end if you want. Again, we would just limit that, okay, you can have your home ownership, your home mortgage interest deduction, and maybe you can even have some of your pension fund deduction, but you can't have everything. We'll limit some of it, and I think there's no reason we should be taxing capital gains at half the rate of earned income.
Right, and that that has come about fairly recently, actually.
And I think we also, 90%, 95%, because it's so grotesquely upside down, 95% of people will gain under this. The average expenditure is $2,200 per year per person, every man, woman, child in the country. So we can make almost everyone better and substantially better in a way that contributes to the common welfare.
Do you think people realize how much some of these tax benefits are really going to the wealthy? I mean, I always think of the brouhaha a few years ago when the Obama administration proposed doing away with the 529 exemption. And people were in an uproar, right? And they had to pull back immediately. But they're used by, like, I think, an infinitesimal fraction of the population. It's not even out of the single digits, right? I mean, do people realize this?
No. I think that's part of what we're fighting, right? And the minute you mention the word tax code or the words tax code, people's eyes glaze over and they think it's hopelessly complex. I go to the tax code for the same reason that Willie Sutton robbed banks, because that's where the money is. But I think that what we're fighting is ignorance. But I'll say a young colleague asked me the other day, said, so why are white men so terrible? And I had a hard time answering that. But I think part of it is we don't know the privilege that we have. So I think a lot of this is ignorance, and people don't understand how much we're spending through the tax code, or how upside down it is, or how unproductive it is.
Okay. Then the opposite question is, you spend a lot of time in the book laying out how we could do all this without, increasing the deficit by changing the tax code, right? But it often seems to me that, the deficit becomes an issue when we're talking about plans like this. But when we're talking about, say, tax cuts or military spending, I don't want to get too loaded here, right? We're this is, both sides tend to do this to some extent. It's somehow never an issue. Why is it so important that we have to show how to finance all of this?
I understand the argument that says we need to do what we, as DeRay McKesson said in the closing session of our Prosperity Summit, a budget reflects your values, and if it doesn't reflect your values, then it's not your budget. And then he also said, does anybody really doubt that a 5-year-old should be able to have lunch? I don't think, we do. But by saying, look, we're already spending this money, I feel like I remove one argument, one big argument for why we can't do this. We have the money, we have the people, we have the demonstrated infrastructure to roll this out. All we have to do is to do it.
Do you think other laws need to be changed along with this? This is not something you go into in the book, but it's something that occurred to me, is that, right now it's somewhat open season for a lot of financial predators out there. This is ongoing for a very long time. People's healthcare expenditures are just going insane at this point. We know that. Do other things need to sort of come together to make all of this worthwhile, right? Because I think about healthcare, for example, and I think, oh yeah, somebody will get a few $1,000s together, and then they'll end up in the emergency room, and their deductible will be, $6,000 and goodbye, right? I mean, so how important is it to sort of try to change the architecture around things, aside from what you're proposing, to make what you're proposing work better?
Right. There are lots of other things, and I do come to this central notion of an account in every chapter, although they're all other pieces. We have very little, and you know more about this than I do, we have very little evidence that financial education alone makes a difference. But we do have evidence that with accounts, each hour of financial education up to about 10 will increase monthly saving by $1 to $2. That may not sound like a lot, and that's for both basic financial education and asset-specific financial education. It could mean another $300 a year. Healthcare, peer support systems, minimum wage increases. I think there's a lot we can do. What I take to heart is Gloria Steinem's advice that sometimes don't do the most important thing. Do whatever you can do. This is one big strategic piece, which again, I think frees people to figure out what else they need to do. I mean, healthcare, yeah.
To talk about financial education for a minute, one of the things you do through your programs that I really like is you do financial education at the moment that it's relevant for people.
Yes.
Which is a really important point, right? Because we all have this idea, oh my God, nobody took financial education in high school, and look what happened 30 years later, which is ridiculous because nobody remembers anything from high school, right? But what you do is you work with people when they're trying to save money, and that makes a difference. How did you come to do that, and why don't more groups do that with people? Why isn't that the more common approach?
Well, again, this good question. I think it came again bottom up. It's where the message is the message that you work in partnership with communities, and they tell you what works, and through the interaction, and we, if we're not too dense, we learn.
Okay. So how do you think? One of the things you do in the book is you do a lot of benefits you mentioned on sliding scale. Do you think that's going to take out support and that you would just be better off spending more money and giving the same to everybody? Because one of the things in this country that we really like are universal benefits, right? The two most popular things are Social Security and Medicare. And it's not just because they take care of the elderly, at least this is my opinion, who need it. It's also because everybody from the richest to the poorest is eligible for it. Why not just try with more of an approach along those lines of everybody can get in, and we're not going to put these on a sliding scale?
Tremendously popular. It's why every account system that I propose is for everybody.
Right.
But with the difference in that it's graduated. And that's because everybody doesn't start at the same place. So to have the same opportunity for everyone, you actually have to have different policies. we also need to face up to our history. You know, African American people, you know, I shouldn't have to say it, were slaves. You know, I talk about 4 waves of investing in the common genius. Universal public education, it was for white kids. The Homestead Acts. We gave away millions of acres for land we stole from Native Americans and denied to African Americans. The 30-year mortgage in the suburbs backed by restrictive covenants, and then the GI Bill that I gave you the history of. No wonder that wealth, you know, Tom Shapiro and Melvin Oliver call wealth inequality or the racial wealth divide the sedimentation of past discrimination. We need to face up to that uneven starting place.
And so this will be my last question. Is it, you know, in some ways it's reparations without calling them reparations, right? Or making it a formal reparations that somebody applies for, right?
Right. I mean, I think, look, we all know, you can't change the history, but we can learn from it. And we can shape the future. And there's no reason why we shouldn't. I mean, we will all do better for that.
Okay, I am getting the sign that I'm supposed to be going to Q&As. So, from the audience, I mean. So, everybody, if you have a question, where I'm not sure where there's a mic. Over here. Why don't you go over here? I saw your hand first.
But thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. That was going to be my last question. You and I have been on the same wavelength for a lot of this, which has been great.
Hi, Diane Oakley from the National Institute on Retirement. Thank you so much for everything you said. One of the things that struck me in listening to some of these last questions, one of the things that have been sold about the tax cuts is this is the way we grow our economy. What we have really forgotten is you don't grow your economy by borrowing for a tax cut, because ultimately you have to pay that money back. But in essence, what these accounts are talking about is we're growing our economy by investing in Americans. And have you been able to identify some numbers that we could put around that to counterbalance the type of growth figures that people and the arguments from tax cuts?
Yes. Thank you for that question. And I'll do 2 pieces. I mean, I do believe we should grow the economy the old-fashioned way. I think those 4 investments in the common genius, those policies that I talked about, have created the most significant, widely shared, enduring increases in economic well-being in our history. Take just the educational investments of the GI Bill. It returned $7 for every $1 in expenditure. I think this is the way you grow an economy from the bottom up. I got in trouble the other day for suggesting this, but I do think money's important. But money is important because it leverages the talents and work and vision of individuals. That's the value added. And that's the ethic of America. Rewarding the wealthy are not the job creators. Some of them are, but only some of them. Increasing rewards to capital doesn't mean, as my friend Pete Hansen used to say, that the money's getting to the people who are the entrepreneurs who will create the jobs and innovations of the future. This will.
Other questions? Right here.
Thanks. I'm Eleanor Lacane with PRN Radio, and love your work. Can't wait to read the book.
Thank you.
I'm kind of wondering, though, you're exactly on point. When we invest in people, we grow the economy, everybody's healthier, it helps everyone. And yet, because of the way our system is currently operating, the lobbyists are representing mostly the top 1%. So last December, when they passed the tax bill, get 83% of the benefits going to the top 1%, mostly the already big businesses, which are not really the job creators. So when we invest in people, we'll create those jobs, but we don't have the lobbyists for the lower income people, even the middle income people. The lobbyists are representing the top 1%. That's why we end up with the tax bill we did in December. So And you talked about one pilot project that was in and kind of got lost in the shuffle. How do we take your kind of program ideas and actually implement them at the state or federal level, given the power of the 1% in the lobbying?
Thank you for that question. So we have actually implemented these at the community level, the local level, the state level. At the Prosperity Summit we had a couple weeks ago, we featured 4 mayors of Stockton, California, Tacoma, Washington, St. Paul, and Oakland, who are doing amazing things, all of them with child accounts, bottom up. And we do have examples in the private sector and at the federal level passed anyway. I think we don't have necessarily the lobbyists for everyone, but this is why I wrote the book, and this is why I need you. I think we need to say what we know, right? That given a chance, people will create a future for their families, their communities, and the country as a whole. That we're spending the money already, but we can spend it better without incurring an additional dollar of debt, although we don't need to be afraid of debt as long as the investment and the return of the investment exceeds the debt, which I don't necessarily think some of the other cuts have. We need a call for change. And we need, my favorite quote is the Judge Learned Hand quote that says, liberty lives in the hearts of people. If it dies there, no court, no constitution, no law can save it. I think it's the same with this idea of an economy where everyone can play.
Over here.
Bob, thanks so much for your inspiring work and all your ideas and your lifetime work. I'm Carl Pulzer, and I started a project called the Center on Capital and Social Equity a few years ago because I didn't fit anywhere. So I started my own think tank. But the idea was like having read Piketty and all these guys and getting, what's driving the economy, all this inequality, and then to promote inclusion of everybody, particularly the bottom half. So I have an advocacy component. And I've been promoting a universal retirement plan. Just had an op-ed come out. And the two basic ingredients, and I'm getting to a question. Well, one is you need some money. $500 a year is what I came up with. And you need a place. You need a fiduciary, run account. And so Congress needs to create a TIA CREF to fill in the gap for the folks that don't have a plan. So that's the basic idea. Then I was thinking you got to be careful. Like the designers of all this stuff are usually middle class people with money. The users are lower income people. They need to get their hands on their money faster. So we got to be careful not to superimpose our demand curve on them for access to money. So I think there is a place you could build a compartment in for them to have an emergency loan within this structure. And there's in terms of the 3 sources of the income or of the assets. The money they put in, justifiably they could take out, they leak it out anyhow in the 401k system. The money the government puts in and the employer puts in, you have more of a case to keep that for the future. So there's a way to do that. And the right-leaning think tanks are already using that against universal retirement, saying, well, they'd rather have the money for these. They need $400. So, you got to deal with that. But anyhow, I just wondered about that logic of building in a rainy day fund inside of 401k. I'm sorry I went on so long, but that's just the background.
No, thank you for your work. And I think we're thinking along very similar lines. That money's such an interesting thing in a lot of ways. It's a way of counting. It should be fungible, right? Everybody will have a different way of threading these different uses. The emergency use, just the stabilization. Some people will go, thinking about it logically, maybe education, then business, then home, or home, then business. But in truth, everybody will do it a little differently, and that's fine. You know, that's the way it should be, but they should be given their choices. You know, some people ask me about why do you do the savings match, and doesn't that impose, you know, a barrier and a burden? But what I think real wealth is confidence, competence, connections, and capital. And what the matching arrangement, you know, affects is respect and a dynamic psychological, sociological, economic, political exchange, conversation.
And in your book, I have to say, when you talk about the accounts, you do have an emergency component for people to
Yes.
withdraw. So talk about that for 1 second.
Well, in a way, that's the whole purpose of the universal savings account. I mean, and I talk about past money, present money, future money. Everybody needs the future money. You need at least some kind, you know, even a few $100s to stabilize. I mean, the emergency, the accidents are inevitable. But if you're lucky enough that the emergency doesn't happen for a while, it grows, and we find that as that grows, it attracts attention. I give the story of Michael Sheridan in the book, who sees a flyer on the wall advertising, you know, the TIA-CREF retirement teacher or professor retirement plan, and he assumed no one would go because he knew his colleagues were deficient when it came to financial prowess, and the room was overflowing. There's a way in which money attracts interest of a intangible kind as well as a financial kind.
Other questions? Right here.
Thank you for this conversation. You guys are great pair. Bob, what are the racial dimensions of the GI Bill? I have to admit that's part of my personal story because my dad from a tiny town in Missouri was able to go to Yale on the GI Bill from a very poor family and then to Yale Law School. And I never knew that it was not accessible to African Americans until really recently. So what are the racial dimensions of how, you mentioned the South, but was it really redlined? Was it like, how was it allocated?
In other parts of the country, it was not, I mean, but of course, the South was where most African Americans were at that point, for example. But in New England, in Pennsylvania, in the West, and even in the Midwest, there was more. But it was still, you know, communities were still redlined, so that home ownership opportunities were sharply constrained, as were appreciation opportunities. Education, most folks went to historically black colleges and universities because, again, there were the admissions practices. So there were a series of discriminations. Going back to your question of why not the same for everybody, I think one of the lessons of the GI Bill is that if you want to include everyone, you need to be proactive about that.
So it wasn't policy, it was practice.
It was both. I mean, again, John Elliott Rankin made sure that administration of the GI Bill in the South was in the hands of local and state officials in a Jim Crow era.
So what percentage of African Americans?
So I'm bad at remembering the numbers. The numbers are in the book.
So you need to buy the book.
And there were, I mean, but there were not insubstantial numbers of African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans who benefited.
Anyone else? Up right here.
There's no other question. I have a second question. Thank you. Love everything you're doing here. Kind of following up with the GI Bill, you mentioned that specifically as an area where that was made available to men and not to women, even though we know millions of women were in that war effort.
Right.
But we know also through every stage with education, with hiring, with promotions, with retirement, and then Social Security and time out, that women at every step of the level tend to earn less, save less, invest less, and have greater financial stress than men do at every level of society. So I'm wondering, when you're talking about these programs, is there any recognition of the extra hurdles that women have to go through in order to get to some measure of financial security? Or is it all women and men, we're all in the same boat together, let's all try to rise together?
So I would add to your rightful litany that there's a gender wealth gap as well, right? Big time. And again, a structure in there. The other thing is, it's not right, but women also bear more responsibility for kids, even though it's equally the male responsibility. And there's this well understood function. If you want to help kids, you help women too, which again shouldn't be an added responsibility. It should be shared. But I think it's very important in sharing this. And I would say, if you look at all of our demonstration projects and policy projects, a majority of the participants were women. So we have a record of achievement there that we should parlay. So I think you open the doors, what you will disproportionately get is the folks that have been held back, and that includes women, as well as a lot of the other marginalized groups.
I have time for one last question if anybody has one. Go ahead. Okay, you're last.
I would say if you were to...
You have to introduce yourself.
Sure. Steve Oriel with Evergreen Life Wealth Partners. If you were to speak to the 1%, the 2%, how does this also accrue to their benefit as well? I mean, if we're going to sell this to everybody, obviously this benefits everybody, but how do you put it in terms that this is about all of us doing better?
I don't think anybody can be totally hopeful in an economy where most people are getting left out and stressed and behind. There's a lot of data in the book, how crime goes up. When people are desperate, that's when you need to worry. And paying for prison is a lot more expensive than paying for generation accounts. And being, Gloria Steinem will make this point, there's a point about wealth being isolating. I think there are a lot of unhappy people who are isolated. So that if you can live and learn and interact safely with others, you will lead a much richer life. And again, if it's dollars and cents, we can prove it on that basis as well. I also think this psychological aspect of money, that it builds confidence, it also can go to people's heads. And I think too many of us, I give the story of Warren Hellman in the book, who was a very successful investment banker. Dearer to Peggy and I, he gave the Hardly Strictly Bluegrass Festival, a free bluegrass festival to the city of San Francisco. And he talks about, money is a lot like manure. Hoard it in one place, it stinks. Spread it out and good things grow.
That's a great way to end. So anyway, on that note,
Thank you all very much.
Yes, I want to say thank you for a terrific conversation.
Thank you very much.
And I want to echo your thanks, Helen.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that concludes this. Thank you, Helaine, and thank you, Bob. There are books for sale. Bob's available to sign some of them as well. I love that metaphor. I hope somebody tweeted it out at the end. And yeah, please join us once again in a round of applause. Cheers.